My name is Hannah Miller. I'm 34, and maybe you've been there too, sitting at a family table where every story is about someone else's success, while your own hard work is brushed aside like it never mattered. For years, my brother was the star. My parents' pride, and I was the one who laughed at the broken one, the quiet one, the disappointment. But that Christmas Eve in 2022, as snow fell outside my parents' glowing house, I carried a secret. They mocked me again louder than ever, not knowing the truth. What happens when the family that belittled you discovers you're no longer the weak one? Christmas Eve 2022. Snow came down heavy on the quiet streets of Oak Park just outside Chicago. My parents' house glowed like a postcard, twinkling lights wrapped around the porch, a tall tree brushing the ceiling gifts piled beneath it. I brushed the frost from my coat before stepping inside, whispering to myself, just a few hours, then I can leave. The living room buzzed with voices. My father Richard sat in his leather chair, silver hair neat, but his eyes sharp like he still controlled every corner of this family. My mother Margaret drifted in and out with trays of cookies, smiling the way she always did when company was around. Daniel, my older brother, stood in the center of the room, a glass in hand, his Rolex flashing under the lights. His wife Susan perched beside him in a red dress while their kids darted around the tree shrieking with laughter. It should have felt warm. Instead, it made me feel like I'd walked into someone else's celebration. We took our seats around the long dining table. Candles flickered, plates gleamed, wine poured. Then Daniel rose, voice smooth and practiced. A toast, he announced. To a successful year. I just signed the deal for our Texas expansion. Susan here was promoted at her firm. He paused, letting pride hang in the air before turning to me. His smile widened. And my little sister, still in that tiny downtown office, right? At this rate, Hannah, you'll be broke forever. The table erupted in laughter. Richard nodded as if Daniel had said something wise. At least she's employed, he added. Not everyone can be ambitious. Margaret leaned over her hand, patting my shoulder with feigned tenderness. Sweetheart, don't be hard on yourself. Not everyone has Daniel's sharp mind. I forced a smile, but inside my chest burned. These roles had been rehearsed for years. Daniel the star, me, the disappointment. Tonight, though, there was one thing they didn't know. I wasn't the weak one anymore. Daniel wasn't done. He thrived in the spotlight. He bragged about their summer in Europe, then leaned towards Susan, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. If Hannah saves for 3 years, maybe she can afford an economy ticket to Paris. Unless she's still busy paying rent on that broom closet office. The kids giggled, though they didn't understand. Laughter circled the table. I stared at my glass, swirling the red liquid slowly. Once those words would have cut me down. Now they reminded me of the nights I worked past midnight contracts spread across my desk. I wasn't broke. I just hadn't told them what I had built. The air thickened as Richard jumped in with one of his stories. He recalled a deal Daniel had wisely walked away from, making sure to note, not every risk is worth taking. That's the mark of real success. His eyes flicked toward me as he said it. I sat still, every jab absorbed in silence. They thought they were pressing me down. What they couldn't see was the ground shifting beneath their feet. Halfway through dinner, I reached into my bag and slid a small box toward Margaret. She unwrapped it, revealing a soft gray cashmere scarf. How thoughtful, she said politely. Then she lifted the Tiffany necklace Daniel had given her earlier. But look at this, Hannah. Isn't it stunning? The pendant sparkled under the light and the table oohed in admiration. I smiled calmly. What no one realized was that the scarf came from a boutique inside Miller Tower, a building with my name on the deed. A quiet proof. They dismissed it as nothing, but to me it was a marker of how far I'd come. Dinner rolled on with more laughter, more clinking glasses. Daniel drained his wine and clapped me on the back harder than necessary. Remember, Hannah, family's always here for you. If that office of yours shuts down, call me. I'll find you a spot. The table roared again. I lifted my head and met his eyes. No smile, no retort, just a steady, cold stare. For the first time, I saw his grin falter just for a second before he looked away. If there had been a camera, It would have stopped there, catching my face no longer marked by defeat, but by resolve. I sat through the rest of dinner listening to the chatter, the clink of cutlery, outwardly calm, inwardly steady. While they laughed at the same old jokes, I held a secret none of them could imagine. They thought I was broke. They thought I was small. They had no idea what was coming. The wine at the table was still warm on my lips when old memories came rushing back. Childhood has a way of clinging to you like a shadow that never loosens its grip. In our wooden house on the edge of Chicago's suburbs, everything revolved around Daniel. His pictures lined the hallway: Daniel in a basketball jersey, Daniel with a trophy, Daniel smiling proudly with our father's arm around him. My presence barely registered just one family portrait where I stood in the corner smiling faintly as if I had wandered into the frame by accident. I remember one moment vividly. I was in 5th grade and had just brought home a report card filled with straight A's. My heart pounded as I handed it to my parents, hoping for a smile, maybe even a hug. My father glanced at it, muttered, "Good, keep it up," then tossed it aside as Daniel stormed in, drenched in sweat from a basketball game. He lifted a silver medal into the air, shouting, "I won!" The house erupted. My parents, even the neighbors who had stopped by, clapped and cheered, as though he had brought home an Olympic title. I stood frozen, my report card still in my hands. No one remembered me. No one cared that I had achieved perfection in every subject. Another memory stings just as sharp. The school hosted a ceremony, and I was chosen to read an essay about my greatest dream. I practiced for days, standing in front of a mirror, whispering the words until I could recite them with my eyes closed. On stage, my voice shook, but I pushed through, pouring everything into those lines. When I finished, a smattering of polite applause rose from the audience. Then Daniel's name was announced as Athlete of the Year. The auditorium exploded in cheers, whistles, stomps that shook the floor. I clapped until my palms stung, forcing a smile, but inside I felt myself shrinking into nothing. Favoritism wasn't a one-time slip. It became the rhythm of our home. Every holiday, every dinner, every story we told circled back to Daniel. On my mother's birthday one year, I decided to give her something made with my own hands. I spent a week knitting a green scarf, each stitch tight and careful. My fingers blistered, but I pictured her smiling as she wrapped it around her neck. The night of the party, I handed her a small box. She opened it, eyes flickering with faint surprise. "Sweet Hannah, that's very cute." Before the warmth could settle in, Daniel placed his box on the table. Inside was a brand-name leather wallet, the logo shining under the light. My mother gasped. "Oh my God, Daniel, this is perfect." The family rushed over, praising, touching, laughing. My scarf slipped from her lap onto a chair and stayed there forgotten. I stood quietly, my heart heavy, realizing that my love and effort meant little compared to a label. That was the story of my childhood, overshadowed, unheard, erased in plain sight. But there was one person who noticed. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Anderson, sometimes joined family gatherings. That night, as everyone fussed over Daniel's gift, she bent down, picked up the scarf, and wrapped it gently around her neck. She looked straight at me and said softly, "You have skill in these hands, Hannah. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Her words were small, but they landed deep. In a house where my worth was measured against my brother's shine, her voice became a lifeline. Later that night, I lay in my room, the sounds of laughter drifting up from downstairs. I stared at the scarf on my bed, one loose thread unraveling at the edge. My chest tightened, but I clutched it close, whispering to myself that I would hold on. That was the night I learned silence. I learned to swallow tears, to bury anger. But in that silence, something else took root. A small, stubborn fire. A promise that one day I would no longer live as Daniel's shadow. Years passed, but the pattern never changed. Daniel remained the star praised, admired, celebrated while I became background noise, a footnote. And yet, as I stepped into adulthood, I began to see that it wasn't just my family who thought that way. The world outside was waiting with its own judgments, ready to remind me that in their eyes, I would never measure up. and that was the next lesson I had to learn. My conviction was tested almost immediately. One winter afternoon, some of my old college classmates dropped by. They were the same people I used to cram with in economics classes, only now they walked into my shabby office wearing sharp suits and polished shoes. Their laughter carried that new tone, the kind that comes with a steady paycheck and a title on a business card. When they stepped inside, they froze for a moment, then burst into laughter. "This is your big company. Looks like a broom closet," one of them joked, shaking his head. I forced a smile, pulled out the old coffee pot, and poured them each a cup. The coffee was lukewarm, the mugs chipped, but I tried. They didn't stop. Their whispers weren't even whispers. "Can you imagine working in this dump? Who would take her seriously?" The sound of their laughter lingered long after they left, echoing down the narrow hallway. I sat alone at my desk, surrounded by folders no one had signed, and for the first time in months, the silence felt heavier than the snow piling outside. But that wasn't the end. A week later, I bumped into my old internship supervisor. He invited me to a cafe downtown, and I thought maybe finally a chance at a real connection. I ordered tea, carefully laid out my notes, and shared my ideas about real estate ventures. He leaned back, gave me that practiced smile older men use when they're about to dismiss you kindly. "Hannah, you're smart, but be realistic. Instead of burying yourself in these risky schemes, why not settle down with a successful man? Leave these heavy things to men. That's what they're built for." His words cut in the most polite tone possible. I kept my face straight, but under the table my hands clenched until they shook. That night I went back to my tiny office. Snow fell thick, covering the city in silence. Inside, the heater barely worked and the cold bit into my fingers. Still I sat under the weak yellow lamp, scribbling through financial sheets, correcting line after line. My hands were red and raw, the skin cracking at the knuckles. But each number, each word I wrote, felt like another brick I was laying into the foundation of a future I refused to let anyone dismiss. I caught sight of my hands trembling and rough, and suddenly Mrs. Anderson's voice came back, the old neighbor who once told me, "You have skillful hands, Hannah. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." That memory held me upright that night. Days passed, and I decided to take the next risk. I put on my old blazer, faded at the seams, and walked into a meeting with a small group of investors. My documents were neatly bound, my presentation rehearsed down to the pauses. My palms sweated as I passed out copies. I stood in front of them, speaking with every ounce of conviction I could muster. When I finished, I waited chest tight, heart pounding. Then one of them chuckled. "You expect us to put money into a project pitched by a girl in a back alley office? Sorry, Hannah. We invest in reality, not in dreams." The whole room broke into laughter. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled, and just like that, they dismissed me. Heat rose to my face, burning, but I didn't let a single tear fall. I gathered my documents, thanked them for their time, and walked out with my head high. Inside, I whispered to myself, if not them, someone else. I'm not done. That night, I returned to my office once more. The street outside was empty, the snow still falling. I spread my plans across the desk, picked up my pen, and wrote one more line at the bottom. One day they'll knock on my door. I didn't know when. I didn't know how, but I knew it would happen. And in that moment, the real journey began, the kind where every rejection is just fuel, every sneer another reason to keep going. The years from 2014 to 2017 nearly broke me. My office sat between two dusty storefronts downtown, its cracked window pane rattling every time the bus passed. The heater groaned in winter, the ceiling fan clattered in summer, and the only thing steady was the stack of bills on my desk. My savings thinned to almost nothing. Every decision felt like a coin toss, but I told myself the market was shifting, and if I kept pushing, there had to be room for me somewhere. In the mornings, I took buses out to forgotten suburbs, jotting notes on vacant lots where weeds pushed through the concrete. Afternoons, I knocked on bank doors, proposals clutched tight, hoping someone would see promise where others saw waste. Nights I sat hunched under a yellow lamp, rewriting numbers until the ink blurred and my eyes stung. I whispered to myself, if I work hard enough, someone will notice. But no one did. I remember a sweltering July afternoon in 2015, sitting at a Starbucks with three investors I had begged to meet. I arrived early, arranged my binders in a neat stack, and practiced my opening pitch under my breath. When they finally appeared, sharp suits, confident smiles, I stood straighter, willing myself to belong. 5 minutes in, one of them leaned back, his iced latte untouched, and waved me off. "Hannah, you sound passionate, but there's nothing here for us. You don't have backing. You don't have a big firm behind you. We can't gamble like you can." His friends nodded, already rising from their chairs. My binder lay unopened between us, its crisp pages untouched. I forced a smile, thanked them for their time, and watched them walk out into the sun. The empty chair across from me felt heavier than the whole room. Still, I refused to stop. By 2016, I scraped together the courage to take a bigger risk. An old lot on the outskirts of Chicago caught my eye. Nothing but cracked pavement and boarded windows, but I imagined rental housing a project that could at least steady my footing. I went to the bank trembling but determined. The loan process felt like a trial. Officers combed through every line of my plan, their questions sharper than knives. One of them, a man in a spotless gray suit, eyed me with polite pity. "Are you sure you understand the risks projects like this usually require? More established leadership? A man's name on the paperwork, at least." I bit my tongue until my jaw ached. My pen scratched across the forms anyway. I signed every line, fully aware of the risk. I thought better to try and fail than to stand still forever. And fail I did. The market-dipped tenants never came, and my projections collapsed like wet paper. Within a year, I had to sell the property at a loss. Each time I passed that empty lot afterward, it felt like walking by a grave one I had dug with my own hands. Not just for the project, but for a piece of myself. Still, the hardest part wasn't losing money. It was hearing what people said after. One evening, I sat in a cafe laptop, open adjusting numbers I already knew wouldn't save me. Behind me, voices rose in careless laughter. Familiar ones. Old classmates, the kind who had walked straight from graduation into polished offices. "She's still on that real estate kick, 3 years and nothing to show for it. What a waste of a degree. She could have had a safe job like the rest of us." I froze, staring at my spreadsheet while their words cut into me sharper than they intended. My cheeks burned, but I didn't turn around. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. That night back in my office, the silence wrapped tight around me. Papers lay scattered across the desk, projects that never came to life. I sank into my chair, placed the failed proposal in front of me, and for the first time in years I cried. The tears came heavy. Not just for the rejections, but for the loneliness, the endless cycle of proving myself only to be dismissed. I cried until the sound of my sobs echoed in the small room, until the shame drained out of me. When the tears dried, I sat upright again. My eyes burned, but my voice was steady as I whispered into the emptiness, "I'm not done." And something shifted. I realized I had been chasing the same polished opportunities everyone else wanted. The obvious projects already claimed by bigger names, the shiny deals that bankers could show off at cocktail parties. Of course, no one took me seriously. I was playing their game on their turf. So I decided to change the rules. Instead of chasing the spotlight, I would search in the shadows. I would look for cracks others dismissed, scraps too small for the giants to bother with. If one door slammed shut, I'd find a side door. And if no door existed, I'd build one. That resolve carried me into the next year. And then, almost like the city was answering me, an opportunity appeared. Chicago announced a new train line expansion, including a small station in a neglected neighborhood. Buried in the article was a detail no one cared about, but I saw it, circled it in red. Near the planned station sat a forgotten strip of land half the size of a basketball court. Nobody wanted it. To me, it glowed like a spark waiting for air. I didn't know it yet, but that tiny lot would become my first real turning point. The moment I stepped off the beaten path and onto my own. The moment every no I had swallowed would finally turn into a yes. In 2018, Chicago announced plans to expand the train line. I remember reading the article in the morning paper, scanning past the big headlines. Until one small detail made me stop. A new station was going to be built in an overlooked neighborhood on the city's edge. The next morning, I drove out there. The streets were cracked storefronts boarded up, and the houses leaned like tired shoulders. People walked quickly through, eyes down, as if nothing about that place was worth their time. But where they saw decay, I saw possibility. At the corner, just 2 minutes from where the station would stand, I found a narrow lot. Half the size of a basketball court, nothing impressive. Its owners, an elderly couple, had been trying to sell it for years. No one wanted it. I sat at their worn kitchen table, sipping the tea they offered, listening to their stories of struggle and disappointment. Their voices carried the weight of time, but also a faint hope that someone someday would finally see value in what they had left behind. I didn't have much money. I had barely enough to cover my small office and basic expenses, but I knew I couldn't let it slip away. I scraped together every dollar I had, added a modest bank loan, and signed the papers. When word got out, my friends laughed. "Hannah, that lot is worthless. Who would even want to live near that station?" Their laughter rolled off my back, but inside I held on to a quiet determination. They had underestimated me before. This time I would prove them wrong. Construction wasn't smooth. From day one I faced doubt. The contractor squinted at me, shaking his head. "A young woman running this. Do you even know what you're doing?" The bank too barely trusted me. They released funds in small drips, forcing me to juggle schedules and beg for extensions. I spent hours on the phone negotiating every line item, every invoice. And when I wasn't on the phone, I was on site, standing in the cold, watching the bricks go up, making sure nothing was skipped. At night I went home with dust in my hair, my coat heavy with the smell of cement. My body ached, but I wouldn't give in. Every time I remembered the mocking voices, friends, colleagues, even strangers, I pushed harder. Months later, the building stood finished. Modest but solid. 3 stories. A cafe on the ground floor with a handful of apartments above. Nothing that would make the news, but to me, it was monumental. The grand opening came on a rainy Saturday. I sat by the cafe window watching the water stream down the glass, terrified that no one would come. Hours passed, and I almost believed the voices that told me I had wasted my last chance. Then the door opened. A young couple, dripping wet from the storm, stepped inside. They ordered coffee, sat near the window, and began talking about the new station. "This place is perfect," the husband said, turning to me with a smile. "We work downtown. The train cuts the commute in half. And those apartments upstairs, can we see them?" My hands trembled as I handed them the lease. Their signatures glistened on the page like a promise. That night I cried again, but not from defeat. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of effort transform into something tangible. I had built this, and someone believed in it enough to call it home. Word spread quickly. Within 6 months, every unit was filled. Families moved in. The cafe bustled with customers on their way to and from the station. And the revenue, though modest, was steady. One afternoon, I held the final signed lease in my hand. My pulse raced. It wasn't millions, it wasn't flashy, but it was profitable. Real and deniable profit. I sat in the cafe that evening, sipping a latte while the rain drummed softly outside. Around me, people laughed, cups clinked, conversations buzzed. The little building I had fought for was alive. Leaning back, I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." That small victory gave me more than money. It gave me proof that I wasn't chasing shadows. It gave me confidence. And with confidence came something even more powerful, the ability to stand tall in rooms where I had once felt invisible. At the next family gathering, when Daniel raised his glass to brag about another 6-figure deal, I no longer shrank into silence. For the first time, I knew I wasn't the joke in the room. I had my own story, one they hadn't even begun to imagine, and soon the tables would turn. The restaurant glowed with holiday warmth, chandeliers casting soft light over silver trays and crystal glasses. The air hummed with chatter and clinking forks, the sound of families gathered to celebrate. For us, it was another Miller gathering, which meant one thing: Daniel would shine, and the rest of us would orbit around him. I slipped quietly into my chair, already braced for the rhythm I knew by heart. Daniel stood first, holding up his wine glass. His smile was wide, his voice carried easily across the long table. To another successful year. Closed a 6-figure deal. Expansion in Texas. Not everyone can lead the way, but some of us were built for it. Applause scattered through the table. Aunts nodded proudly. Cousins leaned closer as though he were a celebrity. My father let out a booming laugh. My son, he said, his voice filling the room, always knows how to get ahead. My mother's eyes glistened with pride, her hand resting lightly on Daniel's sleeve. I speared a piece of pasta, chewing slowly, quietly. But the familiar heaviness I used to feel wasn't there. I thought of my tenants locking their doors at night, the cafe humming with life each morning. The quiet revenue that had started to flow into my accounts. They didn't know. Not yet. Daniel basked in the glow, his voice rolling through stories of negotiations and travel. His words painted himself as a hero in every boardroom. The laughter came easily, but I noticed how forced it sounded when it reached me. Then came the cue I had been waiting for. One cousin leaned in, smirking. And Hannah. Still in that little office, the table rippled with chuckles, the same joke repeated for years. Daniel leaned across, patting my shoulder. "My sister has patience," he said loud enough for the waiters to hear. "Dreams take time. But you know, not everyone can turn dreams into money." The sting was meant to land. It didn't. I lifted my glass, took a slow sip, and let my eyes drift toward the candles flickering along the table. In my mind, I saw the soft glow of my apartments, the murmur of families moving in the espresso machine whirring downstairs. Proof. They just didn't recognize it. I stayed quiet, and that silence unsettled Daniel more than a retort ever could. His smirk twitched, then stiffened. Then something unexpected broke the rhythm. Mark, my cousin, who worked in banking, cleared his throat. He wasn't one to speak much at dinners, which made his words land heavier. "Funny thing," he said casually. "People at the bank have been talking about a new rental building near the train expansion. Whoever bought that lot is smart. Very smart. They're about to make a fortune." The table shifted. For a heartbeat, no one moved. My fork slipped against the plate, the sound sharp in my ears. Daniel was quick to recover. He gave a little laugh, brushing it off. Must be some sharp guy. Definitely not the type still doodling in a back alley office. Laughter followed, but it was thinner this time, uncertain. A few glances flicked toward me, curious. Inside me, something tightened. They had just praised me without knowing it. Admired what I had built without giving me credit. My work, my risk, my victory hidden in plain sight. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The secret was kept inside. Dinner carried on, but I could feel the balance shift. Daniel's voice rose louder, almost too loud, as if he was trying to drown out the possibility that he wasn't the only story worth telling. My father laughed harder than usual, my mother chimed in with exaggerated warmth. Yet their eyes darted uneasy as though they sensed an undercurrent they couldn't name. I let them fill the air. I sat steady, every bite of food measured, every sip of wine calm. For once I didn't shrink. When dessert came, the ritual of family photos followed. Daniel pulled my father close. My mother leaned into him, their smiles practiced. The photographer waved us together, and as always, Daniel pushed himself front and center. I stepped slightly back, half hidden in the frame. The flash went off. The laughter followed. But this time it didn't matter. I didn't need to fight for a place in that picture. I had my own now, a 3-story building, alive with voices, the deed signed in my name, the rent checks proving what they refused to see. As we filed out into the cold December night, the city lights shimmered across the glass windows around us. I pulled my coat tighter, the air sharp against my face. "This is only the prelude," I whispered to myself. "One day Daniel will walk into a place I built. And on that day his smile won't save him." The thought steadied me, heavier than wine, warmer than the coat on my shoulders. And soon, much sooner than I expected, that day would arrive. The leaves had just begun to fall in Chicago, painting the sidewalks in shades of amber and rust. It was autumn of 2020, and my life no longer looked like the joke my family had always painted it to be. The small building near the train station had turned into 3 fully rented properties. For the first time, money came in faster than it left. I had also hired someone I trusted, Mr. Whitaker, a seasoned attorney in his 60s. He had represented entrepreneurs far bigger than me, yet he treated my cases with the same precision. His voice was steady, his advice sharp. "Hannah," he told me once, "paper and ink hold more weight than any promise. Remember that." Those words stayed with me. One evening, without notice, my family showed up at the new apartment I had bought downtown. They called it a visit, but I knew better. They wanted to see what I had built, to measure it, to decide if it was real. I poured wine, set out a small spread of cheese and crackers. The moment felt civil for about 5 minutes. Then Daniel leaned forward, one elbow on the table, his eyes scanning every corner of the apartment. "Nice place," he said, voice dripping with doubt. "But are you sure you can hold on to it? Managing properties isn't just playing landlord. It takes skill." My father chuckled, swirling his glass. "Sweetheart, we've been around longer. Why don't you put our names on the documents too? That way everything stays safe. The families should trust each other." I stayed quiet, listening, my fingers resting lightly on the stem of my glass. On the surface, their tone sounded caring. Underneath it was possession, a claim to something that wasn't theirs. The pressure grew. Daniel puffed up, smiling like he was doing me a favor. "Look, we only want what's best for you. A woman running all this alone, risky." That was when I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside was a draft contract, something Whitaker had drawn up earlier just in case. I slid it across the table, my face calm. "If you're serious," I said softly, "why don't you sign?" Daniel laughed, pouring himself more wine. "This easy. Let me be the first." He grabbed the pen, scrawling his name in big letters across the bottom. My father followed, his grin wide. "My son is right. The family stands together." He signed too, without reading a single word. My mother clapped her hands, eyes shining like she had just witnessed something ceremonial. Inside, my pulse raced, but I didn't let it show. I lifted my glass, steady as stone. They thought they were claiming a piece of me. They had no idea they were signing away their chance at it. The next morning, I walked into Whitaker's office with the folder under my arm. He put on his glasses, read slowly, then looked up with an expression I hadn't seen before, a flicker of surprise. "Hannah," he said, his tone deliberate, "do you realize what this means? They signed without understanding. If there's ever a dispute, you now hold proof that they've renounced any rights to your assets. This is ironclad." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I felt a smile spreading across my face, not the polite smile my family knew, not the strained one I had practiced for years. This was something else. That night, back in the quiet of my apartment, I spread the contract across the table. The ink was still bold, their signatures messy from too much wine. Daniel's confidence, my father's arrogance, they were all there, captured in black and white. I stared at the paper, my hand resting on the edge. How many times had they laughed at me, told me I was nothing, insisted I would always be beneath them? And now their own hands had given me the strongest weapon I could ever wield. I whispered into the silence, "The day they walk through my doors, I'll put this on the table. And that day, not one of them will laugh." The thought was sharper than revenge. It was a certainty. But Whitaker's words echoed in my head. A piece of paper could shield me, but it wasn't enough. To make it undeniable, to silence them forever, I needed something bigger, something they could never dismiss or downplay. That was when the dream took shape. Not just another building, a tower, one that reached into the Chicago skyline, impossible to ignore. A landmark with my name attached so that every glance upward would carry proof of what I had built. As the city lights flickered outside my window, I folded the contract carefully, slid it back into the folder, and locked it away. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what was coming. The signatures were mine now. The power was mine. And soon, so would the skyline. Spring of 2021. I found myself standing on the roof of the first building I had ever owned. The air was crisp, the city lights glittered against the night, and the skyscrapers downtown seemed to pierce the sky. I whispered to myself, almost like a vow, One day I'll have one of those. A tower no one can ignore. The idea came from a stretch of land by the Chicago River. It had been an abandoned factory for decades. Everyone else saw danger there: empty lots, rusting fences, broken windows. I saw something else. The location was perfect, just off a main road with a sweeping view of the river. I thought if I could raise a tower here, its value would multiply tenfold. I carried that thought straight into Whitaker's office. I laid down the preliminary sketches on his desk. He studied them with his usual furrowed brow. "Hannah," he said slowly, "this isn't a small project. This is a leap from being a modest investor to the owner of a skyscraper. Are you ready for that?" I didn't hesitate. If I stop at small buildings, I'll be overlooked forever. I need something no one can dismiss. That was the first of many hard conversations. I met architects, engineers, and contractors. Every room I walked into, I felt the stares. Some hid their doubts better than others, but most didn't bother. "You're the owner," they'd ask. "Are you sure you can handle a project worth hundreds of millions?" I didn't have the money in hand. Not yet. But I had vision and patience. I began negotiating with banks then, with private investors, inching forward with every meeting. Each rejection stung, but I kept showing up, folder in hand, voice steady. Of course the road wasn't smooth. At one bank meeting, a gray-haired board member cut me off mid-sentence. His voice dripped with condescension. "Do you know how many skyscraper projects have failed, Hannah? We can't gamble on your fantasy." My grip on the documents tightened, but my tone stayed calm. "You call it fantasy. I call it the future." Another investor tried to corner me. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "We'll fund you, but in return, we'll control the project." I gathered my papers, pushed back my chair, and stood. "I'm looking for partners, not masters." Then I walked out. Weeks later, when local papers picked up my proposal, that same investor called back. His tone had changed. Suddenly he was willing to reconsider. Just as the pressure was peaking, help came from the most unexpected place: David Chen. His name carried weight in the Asian American business community. He called me one afternoon, his voice measured but warm. "Your father never trusted me, Hannah," he admitted. "He thought I didn't belong. But I see something in you. I see persistence, and I believe in this project." His offer wasn't enormous, but it was the first solid yes. And once one investor said yes, others followed. Like dominoes, doors began to open. The day the ground broke on the site, I wore a hard hat and boots, standing where rusted fences once cut off the land. The machines roared to life, claws tearing into the earth, engines pounding like drums. Dust filled the air, and the metallic tang of steel drifted through my lungs. I felt the ground tremble beneath my feet, and I knew this was it. The biggest fight of my life had begun. I whispered the name, tasting it like a promised Miller Tower. But success draws attention. By the time the first walls rose, my family had caught the scent of change. For the first time, Daniel didn't laugh. He didn't mock. Instead, he edged closer, circling like someone who wanted a piece of what he hadn't built. And at the very next family gathering, he didn't hold back. He wanted in. He wanted a share of the tower. That was when the real war began. November 2021. The Miller family gathered in our old wooden house on the edge of town. The table was set with a white cloth, roasted turkey bowls of mashed potatoes, and bottles of red wine. On the surface, it looked like tradition, but the air was sharp, almost brittle. I had barely taken my seat when Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirk tugging at his mouth. "So I hear you're building something downtown." "Miller Tower." "Right, sounds fancy." His tone was light, but his eyes measured every twitch of my face. My father waved a hand, chuckling. "That's good. Finally our daughter shows she can carry the Miller name." I sliced into the turkey, slow and deliberate, saying nothing. But inside, my thoughts churned. They had ignored me for years. Now suddenly they cared. Daniel wasn't finished. He set his fork down and leaned forward. "You should let me in. Big projects like this need men to keep them steady. You've got determination, sure. But let's be real, without someone like me, it's just too much." The clink of cutlery on plates stopped. Every eye turned toward me. I met his stare with a thin smile. Interesting. Last I remember, you said I was just daydreaming in a broom closet office. What changed? My mother rushed in, her voice soft pleading. Hannah, don't be harsh. Families are stronger together. If you add your father and brother's names, people will respect you more. They'll see you as secure. Her words hit harder than Daniel's mockery. I had grown up with that same refrain. I needed them. I couldn't stand alone. And now, when my tower had already risen above 10 stories, they wanted to lay claim as if they had carried a single brick. Daniel's fist struck the table, rattling glasses. I'll be blunt. I want a stake in your project. Without me, you won't be able to hold it. I put my fork down, sat taller, and let my voice cut through the silence. Daniel, I built this myself. You didn't invest $1. You didn't give an hour. What exactly makes you think you deserve a piece of it? His face flushed red. My father's voice boomed, the weight of authority pressing into the room. Enough. Hannah, don't forget your life was built on this family. We raised you, gave you everything. If you've come this far, it's because of us. Don't turn your back on where you came from. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. Inside my bag, I carried a folder with their sloppy signatures, the contract Daniel and my father had drunkenly signed months before. I wanted to pull it out, slap it onto the table, and watch their faces crack. Here. Proof that you gave it all up. But I didn't. Not yet. Timing is power. I looked directly at them instead. Roots aren't chains. I don't forget, but I don't owe. Not for this. The silence was deafening. Daniel gripped his wine glass so tightly that red liquid spilled over, bleeding across the tablecloth. My father's jaw tightened, his teeth grinding. My mother dabbed at her eyes, whispering, How can you say that? Hannah, to your own family. I stood, sliding my chair back slowly. I reached for my coat, draping it over my arm. At the doorway, I paused and let my voice settle, calm and steady. One day, when Miller Tower is finished, you'll understand. But not in the way you think. I walked out. Behind me, the crowded room sank into silence, broken only by my mother's quiet sobs and the roll of a wine glass as it tipped clattering across the table. That night, as the cold November air hit my face, my phone buzzed. I answered, and Whitaker's deep voice filled the line. Hannah. I've reviewed the file. The signatures your father and brother gave, they sealed everything. Legally, they've relinquished all rights. You need to see this. I stopped in my tracks on the dark sidewalk, the weight of his words sinking in. For years, their laughter had been the cage around me. Now I held the key and the lock. It wasn't just a contract anymore. It was fire waiting for the right spark. And I knew exactly when I would use it. A week later, I arranged dinner. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet table in the penthouse I was renting while Miller Tower was still under construction. The invitation was short, family first. No flowers, no flourish. Just 3 words. I knew they would come not out of love, but because curiosity and ambition never let them miss a chance to measure me. That night the doorbell rang right on time. Daniel walked in first, his blue suit polished until it shone. He wore that grin I knew too well, the one that said he thought he was already 3 steps ahead. My father followed, a red tie knotted perfectly, his stride heavy with authority. He had always carried himself like he owned the ground beneath his shoes. My mother came last. Eyes darting across the room, scanning the furniture, the walls. The very air as if searching for flaws she could point out later. We sat at the table. I poured the wine, laid out the food. On the surface, it looked like any other holiday dinner. But beneath the clinking of cutlery, the air was taut, pulled so tight you could almost hear it hum. Daniel leaned back first, swirling his glass. His voice dripped with practiced charm, but there was steel under it. I've been thinking. Miller Tower is too much for you alone. Dad and I should manage it with you. That way it stays safe. My father nodded immediately, his tone calm but commanding. Listen to your brother Hannah. Since you were a child, I've told you family is strength. If you refuse us, you'll only make things harder for yourself. I let them finish, then set my glass down with a soft click. My smile didn't waver. Perfect. Because tonight, we're here to talk about paperwork, and I have something for you both. From under the table, I pulled out a folder and placed it down. Daniel snatched it without hesitation, smirking. Another contract. You think I don't know how to read? He flipped it open with a careless flick of his wrist. His smirk froze. My father leaned in. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the bold header waiver of rights and claims to assets. His gaze dropped lower and the lines around his mouth tightened. There, in black ink, were two sloppy signatures. Richard Miller, Daniel Miller. The room went silent. My mother's voice broke the stillness, trembling. What is this? I met their eyes, one by one, my voice steady. This is the contract you both signed at my apartment. You thought it was about sharing responsibility, but legally, you gave up every claim you had. It was notarized, filed, and kept safe. By me. The door opened just then, breaking the heavy silence. Whitaker stepped inside his black suit, crisp leather briefcase in hand. He gave a small nod as he walked to the table. I was asked to clarify. This isn't a trick. The contract is real. Certified, stored, and binding. Both of you signed away your rights. If there's ever a dispute, the court will rule in Hannah's favor. Daniel shot up from his chair, his face blotched red. That's a lie, I was drunk. I didn't know what I was signing. Whitaker didn't flinch. His voice was calm, almost indifferent. The law doesn't care about your state of mind. You signed. That makes it binding. My father's palm slammed against the table. The sound cracked through the room. Hannah, this is betrayal. A daughter should never turn against her family. I leaned forward, folding my hands. My tone was sharp, but I didn't raise my voice. No, Father. You betrayed me long before tonight. Every laugh at my expense, every dismissal when I tried, every time you made me smaller than Daniel. Tonight isn't betrayal. Tonight is justice. Tonight is the boundary you never believed I'd draw. The dam broke, Daniel shouted, throwing accusations, his voice cracking with rage. My mother sobbed into her hands, the sound sharp and raw. My father's face hardened into stone, his words dripping with threats. But I sat still. My body didn't shake. My voice didn't falter. I didn't shed a single tear. For the first time, I wasn't the girl shrinking in the corner. I was the woman at the head of the table. All those years they thought their laughter would break me, that their doubt would bury me. But tonight their own signatures betrayed them. The truth was in my hands, and it was mine to keep. When the dinner ended, it wasn't with hugs or holiday cheer. It ended with chairs, scraped back doors, slamming footsteps pounding down the hallway. They left in fury, their anger spilling into the cold November night. I stood at the window after they were gone. Outside Chicago glowed. The city kept moving, kept shining indifferent to the storm that had just blown through my apartment. Whitaker packed his briefcase quietly. Before he left, he said only one thing. You've drawn the line, Hannah. Now keep it. I nodded. The weight on my shoulders felt lighter, but I knew it wasn't over. They would not accept defeat easily. They never had. And I knew then the final reckoning wouldn't happen at a dinner table. It would happen in glass and steel in the tower they had dismissed as impossible. The night Miller Tower opened for Christmas, they would face the truth again, not on paper this time, but in the shadow of the skyscraper that carried my name. That would be the night no denial, no threats, no laughter could erase what I had built. December 2022. Miller Tower rose over the Chicago River like a crown of glass and steel. The city sparkled with holiday lights, but the tower itself seemed to outshine them, its windows reflecting every color of Christmas. To the world, it was a skyscraper. To me, it was proof that every insult, every dismissal, every night alone at my desk had led me here. I chose Christmas night on purpose. The invitations were plain white cards, black ink, nothing more. Dinner at the tower. 6 p.m., no details, no explanations. I didn't need to convince them. Curiosity and greed would do that for me. By 6 o'clock, the driveway glowed with headlights. Expensive cars pulled up one after another, tires crunching against the polished stone. Daniel stepped out first, his black suit tailored sharp, his smirk wide and practiced. His eyes swept over the tower, burning with envy he couldn't disguise. My father followed, upright and unshaken pride written into every step. My mother wore a deep red dress, her lips curved in a smile that almost looked warm almost. I waited in the lobby, standing tall against the marble and golden light. Daniel's eyes roamed the walls, the chandeliers, the polished floor. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Looks impressive, sis. But this tower? It's too big for you. Tonight, let's talk about sharing." I said nothing. I just lifted my hand and gestured to the elevator. Silence filled the ride-up, broken only by the hum of cables. The city lights flickered behind us through the glass. For a split second, I saw something in Daniel's eyes. Hesitation, doubt, maybe even fear. The doors slid open. The penthouse spread out like a palace. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed Chicago sparkling below the skyline, draped in Christmas lights. A long table gleamed with candles, crystal glasses catching their glow, silverware lined with precision. Daniel laughed, but it rang hollow. "So you rented this place for the night? Not bad?" I lifted my wine glass, tilting it so the light caught. My voice was calm even. "No, Daniel. I own it. Every inch. From the basement to the rooftop." The words landed like a blow. My father's brows furrowed deep lines cutting across his forehead. "Enough exaggeration, Hannah. A skyscraper isn't something a girl like you can hold." I set my glass down, the crystal touching the table with a quiet ring. Then I nodded. From the corner, Whitaker stepped forward. His silver hair glimmered in the candlelight, his suit sharp, his expression firm. He carried a folder and placed it gently on the table. Page after page unfolded deeds, ownership certificates, legal filings. My name inked clear and bold across every document. Daniel snatched the folder, eyes darting wildly across the papers. His face twisted, and with a snarl he flung it back onto the table. "This is fake. You expect us to believe you own all this. No, you'll share it. With us. We're family." My father rose from his chair, his voice booming across the penthouse. "Daughter, listen carefully. That tower will crush you under its own weight. If you're smart, you'll put my name on the papers. Let me protect it. That's how it should be." My mother clutched my hand suddenly, her touch trembling. Tears welled in her eyes. "Hannah, please. Don't fight us. Don't fight your family. Share it even a little. We'll stand with you." For a second, her grip tightened. For a second, I almost wanted to believe her. But then I remembered every laugh, every slight, every moment they dismissed me. Slowly, I pulled my hand away, holding her gaze. "I gave you chances. But you mocked me. You signed away your rights without even reading. Tonight makes it clear Miller Tower is mine, and mine alone." Daniel's face flushed crimson. His voice cracked as he roared, "You'll regret this. No one turns their back on their own blood." I met his eyes steady, my lips curving into the faintest smile. "I didn't turn my back. You did. Long ago when you left me in the shadows." His rage boiled over. He grabbed his wine glass and hurled it to the floor. It shattered against the marble shards, scattering like ice, the sound echoing through the vast room. My father's jaw locked, his fists curling at his sides. My mother sobbed openly now, her shoulders shaking, her cries cutting through the silence. I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached for the bottle, poured myself another glass, and lifted it slowly. The red liquid caught the candlelight smooth and steady. I raised it to my lips, calm, letting the silence press down heavy on them. This wasn't dinner anymore. It was a reckoning. Years of tension, of humiliation, of being dismissed, all of it collided in this room. For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging for a seat at their table. I was at the head of it. I held the tower. I held the proof, and nothing they said could take it away. Daniel's threats bounced against glass walls. My father's orders fell flat in the air. My mother's tears flowed, but they no longer swayed me. I had already walked through fire. I had already carried loneliness heavier than any tower. Nothing they threw at me tonight could undo what I had built. Outside, the city glittered like a promise. Inside, my family fractured in front of me. And I knew this wasn't just another argument. This was the end of the war. I had one step left. One last cut to sever the rope they kept tying around my neck. Tonight in the tower, they said I could never build, I would make that cut. As I looked across the table at their broken faces, I finally understood I was no longer the girl they could laugh at. I was no longer the shadow behind Daniel. I was free. The glass walls of the penthouse mirrored Chicago's Christmas lights like a sea of stars. From that height, the city looked alive, glowing in red and gold. But inside the room, everything was heavy, almost suffocating. My father sat rigid jaw locked tight. Daniel stood across from me, fists clenched, his face red with fury. My mother had collapsed into a chair, trembling, her sobs breaking the silence in uneven waves. I stood at the head of the table, my hand resting on the stem of a wineglass. My voice steady but cold cut through the tension. Tonight we told the truth. You didn't come for Christmas. You came for greed, and I was ready for the end. Daniel's voice exploded across the room. You think owning a building erased blood? You lost it, Hannah. We were family. The family had rights. I looked straight at him, holding his glare without blinking. Families lifted each other up. All you ever did was step on me to make yourself taller. Starting tonight, that ended. My father moved closer, his voice low, sharp like a knife. Do you think the law would protect you forever? When the family turned its back, you would have nothing. You would be alone. A quiet laugh slipped out of me. Not bitter, not mocking, just soft. I had been alone since I was a child, Father. The difference was now I wasn't afraid of it anymore. My mother's hands shook as she clutched at my sleeve. Her voice cracked. Hannah, please don't do this. I knew your father and brother hurt you, but blood was still blood. For me, just share a little, please. I looked down at her, my gaze softening for the briefest second. Then I pulled my arm free. Mother, I spent my childhood begging for your love. I wouldn't beg anymore. I would not share. Not 1 cent. Daniel slammed his palm on the table so hard the glasses rattled. His shout tore through the room. You'll pay for this, Hannah. I didn't flinch. My hand rose instead. A single clap, sharp final. 2 security officers stepped inside, dressed in black suits, their movements calm and firm. They didn't need instructions, but I gave them anyway. Take them down. The room erupted. Daniel fought shouting insults that bounced uselessly off the marble walls. My father resisted with stiff shoulders, his glare locked on me, burning with rage, as the officers guided him toward the door. His stare promised war, but I didn't move. My mother cried openly, her hands stretching toward me, shaking desperate. I stood rooted. I didn't step forward. I didn't retreat. I let the moment hold. The elevator doors slid shut around them. Their voices faded down the shaft until there was nothing left but the echo of my decision. Silence fell like a curtain. When I turned, Whitaker was there. He had stayed in the corner the whole time, watching his presence steady, solid as stone. He stepped forward, his silver hair catching the glow of the chandelier. His voice was low, steady. Hannah, tonight, you made the right choice. Tonight you were free. I let the words settle, but I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the wall of glass that looked out over Chicago. The city sparkled in celebration fireworks blooming faintly on the horizon. A cold breeze slipped through a narrow crack in the window, brushing across my face, lifting my hair just slightly. I lifted my glass, inhaled slowly, and let everything I had carried for years wash out of me. I thought of the tiny office where I first sat alone, staring at papers no one cared to sign. I thought of the laughter of my classmates, the sting of my boss's words, the way my family dismissed every win of mine as luck. And I thought of every night I cried in silence with no one there to see. All of it was finished now. I raised my glass higher. My voice was barely a whisper, but it filled the room all the same. To my family. The kind I chose, not the kind I was given. I drank the last sip. The taste was sharp, grounding, final. Behind me, Whitaker quietly gathered the papers from the table, slipping them into his briefcase. He didn't say another word, and I didn't need him to. He knew as I knew that this night would never leave me. It was the night the rope was cut. As the clock neared midnight, the city below erupted in cheers, fireworks bursting into the winter air. I stood there no longer the girl they had mocked, no longer the broke one at the Christmas table. I was Hannah Miller, owner of Miller Tower. But more than that, I was finally the owner of myself. And if you're listening to my story, I want to ask you one thing. What would you do if the family that once dismissed you came knocking when you had finally built your success? Leave your thoughts below. And if you want more stories of revenge of people reclaiming dignity after years in the shadows, stay close. There are many more tales worth